Perspective matters. The way we look at things, the position from which we view the world, the various lenses that we view life through, all of these things influence how we both perceive and experience things. Just take a look at a couple of these cartoons. In the first one, we have two beleaguered men who are both overjoyed, but for very different reasons. The first has clearly been stranded on that island for a very long time and is so excited to see a boat. And the other has clearly been adrift at sea for a very long time and is absolutely stoked to have found land. Or this one, which I think was actually referenced in one of our midweek adult ed discussions during Lent. There are two people who are looking at the same number on the ground. To one of them, it looks like a 6, but to the other one, it clearly looks like a 9. And the caption reads, "Just because you are right does not mean I am wrong. You just haven't seen life from my side." And then lastly, I found this one, and I just couldn't resist. From the parent's perspective, adorable stuffed animals. But from the baby's perspective, not so much. So we see that perspective matters. How many of you have a specific pew that you like to sit in every Sunday? Or if not a specific pew, at least a general area of the sanctuary that you tend to stick to, right? Most of us. My pew is right over there, so I'm with you on that. Well, if you are willing to mix things up some Sunday, I would invite you to try sitting somewhere else. It doesn't have to be a permanent move. You can always sneak back in the middle of the service if you want. Thank you so much for emphasizing the point. But give it a try, because literally just sitting in a different spot can make it feel like it's almost a completely different building. You will see so many things that you never noticed before, just like Pastor Laura and the kids did during the Easter Vigil, when they laid on their backs and took on the perspective of the paralyzed man from the Gospel of Mark. Although most of what the kids noticed were the cobwebs in the rafters and critiques about our lighting, but I suppose those are important things to know as well. What I'm saying is that a new perspective can make you see things in a totally different light. Take the reading for today, Psalm 23. Arguably one of the most well-known passages in the entire Bible. I'm sure that there are many here in this room or watching at home that could recite it from memory. The original translation, that is. The one that we heard today, which I used for both my ordination service as well as my installation service here at Bethlehem, that translation almost makes it sound like a completely different passage. Doing something as simple as changing he to she, even when it's about God, who we know is bigger than and exists outside of our human understanding of gender. Even that little change can make something that once sounded so familiar sound so new and foreign. And I'm sure that there were a lot of different responses to it. Some people probably loved it, that they thought that it lined up perfectly with how they understand God. Other people may not have liked it so much. Perhaps it made them feel a bit uncomfortable. And some people probably just thought, well, that was different, and then moved on with their lives. All of these are valid responses based on different perspectives. Now, ideally, we would be open and willing to hear someone else's perspective, right? We'd be willing to admit that ours is not the only point of view and that there might be another perfectly valid way of understanding or experiencing a situation, but we don't always do that now, do we? As much as I hate to admit it, far too often, I'm like the people in the cartoon about what number is on the ground, self-righteously assured of my own correctness and therefore my own superiority, when in reality, what I should do is take a note from Walt Whitman, or Ted Lasso, depending on who you heard it from most recently, and opt for curiosity instead of being judgmental, especially when faced with competing perspectives on the same thing. Our gospel reading for today is one that especially calls for curiosity over judgment, because you can look at it from a myriad of different perspectives. As with all of Jesus' parables, it kind of feels like a big game of who's who at the beginning. And you can try and figure out who the thieves and the bandits are supposed to represent. You can debate the different implications between when Jesus says, I am the gate for the sheepfold, versus when he says, I am the good shepherd. Compare and contrast those two descriptions. But one thing that seems pretty clear is that we are the sheep. And once we understand that, we understand that the question then changes from who are we in this story to where are we in this story. It becomes a question of perspective. Are we safely inside of the sheepfold looking out, or are we on the outside looking in? Being inside the sheepfold sounds like a pretty sweet deal. You're safe and protected from the dangers of the world. You can eat and frolic and nap to your heart's content. And you can do all of that because you know that you are under the watchful eye of the shepherd. So then why would there be sheep outside the sheepfold? I mean, it sounds so awesome to be inside the sheepfold, and it's not that hard. The gate is right over there. You just got to walk in to begin experiencing all of those amazing things we were just talking about. Eating, frolicking, and napping, 3 of my favorite things. That can often be the perspective from the inside. Finding your way in seems obvious, especially when you have already done it. But have you ever had to go somewhere for the very first time and had absolutely no idea how you were supposed to get in? I had to go to a building that I had never been to before to get some lab work done. The joy of my ulcerative colitis means that I get to travel the world and see doctors' offices of all kinds. So I walked in what I thought was the main entrance, and there was a reception desk there, but instead of there being a person to greet or direct me, there was just a phone sitting on the counter, and there was a number that you were supposed to call if you needed assistance. And since I didn't know exactly where I was supposed to go, I dialed the number, and I found out that there was a different entrance that I was supposed to use, one that was just outside and around the corner. Well, it turns out that just around the corner was a little bit misleading, and after walking for what felt like forever, I finally saw an unmarked door and an open gate that led into a small courtyard. And since Jesus said, I am the gate, I decided to try the gate to the courtyard first, where I saw 2 doors, but they were both locked. The outside of the building was covered in that reflective glass, the kind where if you squint and sort of block out the sun, you can sort of see your way through. So when I was pulling on those locked doors, I could see people on the other side of the glass, but they were just ignoring me. So I went back, and I went to that unmarked door, but it was also locked. However, I could just barely see someone on the other side of that glass too, but instead of opening the door for me, she was pointing at this small call box that I had overlooked. Apparently, I had to push the button and wait for someone with the proper clearance to come and open the door for me. So finally, after all of that, I managed to get into the building and get my lab work done. Now, to the people that work in that building every day, I must have looked like an absolute fool. Of course you don't come in those doors off the patio. Those are always locked. Doesn't he know that? Well, no, clearly I didn't know that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have tried to open them. So it just goes to show you that once we become familiar with a place, we can lose the ability to see it from the perspective of those who are on the outside looking in. To the sheep on the inside of the sheepfold, I'm sure that it felt like a wonderful, safe retreat from the dangers of the world. But to the sheep on the outside, I can imagine it feeling and looking like an impenetrable fortress with insurmountable walls. That's how a lot of people understand the church as well. They see it as this formidable building, one that they wouldn't even know how to enter, let alone what to do once they got inside. Now that's a hard thing for me to hear, because I think of the church as a wonderful place that is filled with amazing people. So when I hear that other perspective, my gut reaction is to get defensive. I want to dig my heels in, just like the guys in the cartoon from the beginning. But when I stop and opt for curiosity instead of judgment, I can see what they mean. Because let's be honest, we do some odd stuff in here. This alb that I'm wearing that represents our collective baptismal identity in Christ, it's a little unusual. I remember when I was on internship in Iowa, and I was going to visit a friend at work. She was a supervisor who worked on the floor of a warehouse where they built high-end office furniture. And she was legitimately worried that I was going to show up wearing my white church dress. The church can be a really intimidating place, especially if you are brand new. Everyone else seems to know all the words to the songs, when to stand up, when to sit down. It can feel really overwhelming, which is why we try our best here at Bethlehem to truly embody that slogan that all are welcome. We include information and explanations about stuff on the inside front cover of the bulletin. We wear name tags so that people can feel more comfortable approaching us. Pastor Laura and I routinely mess up and forget stuff during worship just so that everyone knows that no one is perfect. We totally do it on purpose every single time. It is never accidental or unintended. We put up signs here on the campus so that people know where to go, so that no one has to be like me when I went to that doctor's office. We do our best to make this sheepfold as welcoming and accessible as possible, because at some point in our lives, we've all been on the other side. We've all been on the outside looking in. We have all been lost, felt like we didn't belong. And thankfully, in the end, it's not all up to us, because we have the Good Shepherd who knows us and calls us by name, and who reminds us that in the story for today, what truly matters really isn't the physical sheepfold at all, but what is able to happen inside of the sheepfold under the loving care of God. Jesus said, "I came that you might have life and have it abundantly." So maybe that's really what the sheepfold represents, that abundant life. Maybe the sheepfold isn't a place or a building or a particular denomination or even a particular way of worshiping God. Maybe the sheepfold is that abundant life that Jesus came to bring. Abundant life that can and is lived out in the walls of the church, in the walls of this church, but is also so much more than just a church or the church. Have you ever seen what happens to a wool-producing sheep when it gets lost for a long time? Their wool, which is meant to be shorn off periodically, grows and grows into this thick, gnarled, tangled mess. Makes it hard to walk, hard to see, hard to hear. It can be quite dangerous to the health of the sheep. In this situation, that sheep doesn't need the shelter of a physical sheepfold. It doesn't need somewhere that's nice and warm to hang out and feel safe and protected. What that sheep needs is the love and care of a shepherd. That sheep needs to be properly shorn, to be freed from the burdens that weigh it down and limit what it can do. That sheep needs to be set free to live as it was intended to live. And that is what Jesus, as the Good Shepherd, does for each and every one of us. He sets us free from the burdens that we carry, so that we might have life and have it abundantly. He says, lay down your guilt, your regrets, the ways that you have been hurt, and the ways that you have hurt others. Let go of your anger, of your jealousy. Shed those harmful names that people have called you and the false labels that they have tried to place on you, the ways that they have made you feel unwelcome or like you didn't belong. Be set free from your sin and from all that separates you from God. Enter into the sheepfold of God's love. Bask in that abundant life that you were meant to have. and make sure that you leave the gate open for all the other sheep that are still out there trying to find their way in. Amen.